And welcome to our 8th live session in our Tarot On sessions. These are usually 30 to 40-minute sessions that we're holding in the midst of our current global pandemic of 2020. So we're talking about tarot, divination, practical methods. We're talking about Kabbalah, magic, and the Western esoteric industry system, amongst other things such as alchemy, the I Ching, astrology, and also we are reading a bedtime story, which we'll get onto shortly, from Aleister Crowley in his book, a short book, Conks on Pax, and we are reading a bedtime story called Wake World, which we're sort of into a little bit now. And I have lots of other of my favourite short stories to read to keep us company through the coming days, weeks and months. And hello to Quentin, it's been a while since we've been in touch. I hope you're doing very well, and I appreciate that current events will be taking a chunk out of your performance possibilities, so I hope you're coping okay with that, and I hope everyone is coping okay with all of the changes that are going on at the moment. It's all very well and good wanting the world to change, but when it does, by definition, it's changing into something we don't know. It's unknown to us, so we have to be very agile with responding to it. So hello to Australia as well as New York, and do share your questions, and I'm happy to take the questions here and also to discuss them in the meantime and also in the next session. I'm afraid we're going to have a lot of these sessions and you're going to be stuck with me for a while. So we have our do-it-yourself tree of life, which I'm going to talk about, and I said yesterday that we'd always cover one practical technique with tarot and then maybe move on to something more esoteric, then our bedtime story. Today I have to immediately break that rule by switching it around. I do have to talk about the Kabbalah in order to introduce the reasoning for the method that I'm going to do. Someone's saying it's frozen. Can everyone else still see me? I've got a few downloads running at the moment at the same time, so I can switch those off if necessary. Can someone confirm that I'm not frozen as far as everyone else is concerned? Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay. I tell you what, I'll switch off the downloads anyway. Let me just see if I can pause that. There we go. Good, excellent. Okay then, so I've just paused the downloads in the background. I'm sort of doing an upload, a backup of some writing work on a magazine today, so that's good. Okay then, so I need to explain something about the Tree of Life to explain the very simple practical method we're going to cover today, which is what to do when you get stuck. What to do when you get stuck with a card that you can't interpret or you just freeze. Because I've written about this several times and I want to explain the sort of background of that method, that approach, because it's important. It's based on Kabbalah. So yesterday we covered Kether and the Ein Sof Eir. So it's the Ein Sof and Ein Sof Eir. It's called the three negative veils of existence that exist even prior to the Tree of Life. So in effect, there's a sort of nothingness, a limitless nothingness, and an everlasting limitless nothing said to exist before the tree. And out of that, something withdraws, it makes a gap, and that gap has to be a somethingness, because it is a gap in everythingness and nothingness, unimaginableness. So it has to be, the gap has to be imaginable and a something, and in that something condenses a point, and because that point has to be, it then expands outwards, and that comes down the Tree of Life in a lightning flash to manifestation. and then we go back up the tree through the paths, through the major arcana, back up to the top in states of existence, states of relationship to the universe that exist in our awareness, in our sense of identity as we move up the tree. And that's the general map. So it's a way of navigating our spiritual path. In order to explain what we're going to cover today with what to do when you get stuck with a card, I need to explain a further complication with the Tree of Life, which is that there are 4 worlds. And in Kabbalah there are 4 worlds, and there are different levels of the soul and the spirit and the psyche and the shadow and the body and various other things up and down these worlds. And it's a bit like the ancient Egyptian concepts of the self being about, I think, 9 or 12 different things, like the Ak and the Kab and the Ku and various other parts of the psyche that then separate out at death and have to be looked at in very different ways. The Jewish mystics took a sort of hint from the ancient Egyptian and the earlier Babylonian ideas of how we are composed and came up with their own model. And it basically exists in 4 worlds. So we have the right, there are 2 ways of explaining this. I'll do them very briefly, but just remember there are 4 worlds. That's all you need to remember for what I'm going to cover today. But for those who are more interested, the 4 worlds can either be seen as here, here, and here. So we have the upper world is Kether, the next world is Bina and Hokmah, the next world is this central section around Tifreth, and the final world is Malkuth. And as you might imagine, these 4 worlds are descending from the divine unity all the way to our everyday manifestation, where everything is separate. These are my fingers, this is my hand, this is a flip chart, this is a picture, and so forth. The other way of looking at it is to have 4 trees of life. So this is the tree of life in the first world, and then you draw another tree of life starting here, going up, and then another tree of life starting in the middle of that one and overlapping this one, going up, and you have 4 trees of life sort of half superimposed on each other. And that diagram is called Jacob's ladder, from the biblical story of Jacob's ladder. And that's a really powerful model, but obviously it involves 4 trees of life, and they're all overlapping in different ways, but it's an incredibly nuanced model for explaining spiritual progress and development. Yeah, sort of like different dimensions, but sort of more like, I always equate it to tuning forks. So you have a divine tuning fork that sort of makes one note, and then the second world is another tuning fork that resonates to the first one, and then the third world is another tuning fork that resonates to the other 2, and the fourth world down at the bottom is a tuning fork that's resonating to the world above it. And this explains why if you then dampen the tuning fork here, it actually then has a knock-on consequence back up, because everything is connected in that resonance. So basically there are 4 resonating worlds that run parallel to each other on the Tree of Life. Now these worlds are called Atzileth, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. So it's the world of emanation, creation, foundation, and action. So if you just keep to 4 worlds, so there are 4 worlds. The first world is the world of emanation, where everything is coming out. This is up here. The next world is the world of creation, where everything has to be gathered together and create stuff. The next world is foundation, because that's where everything sits and gets some sort of formation. And then the final world is the world of action, where things take place. Now, the world we live in guess which world we actually generally live in. That's a question for the audience to make sure you're there. There's almost 30 of us in the room, so perhaps someone can tell us which world of the 4 worlds we live in. Could be a trick question, it might not be. And then I'll carry on. So which of these 4 worlds, and I can draw them on, sort of ish. So we have a seer, sometimes actually that's here, Yetzirah, Bria, creation, and Atzileth, emanation. Okay. So we have these sort of 4 worlds. Excellent. So everyone is going for a seer, but we don't. We actually live in Yetzirah, the world of formation. And this is the thing that is a difference between a magical way of thinking and a generally mundane way of thinking. Because what we imagine is that Yesod, here in the world of Yetzirah, is this. That what we are looking at, what we are experiencing, is not a seer, because we cannot experience a seer. We cannot actually experience what it is like to be a pen or a board, and we don't know, for example, if we had infrared eyes that were able to visualize and perceive the infrared world, then our world would be very different. So in effect, we live in all of the worlds. That's sort of the trick question, but precisely we live in the world of Yetzirah. That this is the world of Yetzirah. As one of my teachers once told me, we are pathworking now. What we are experiencing now, outside of ourselves, if you look around the room that you're in, if you listen to the sound of my voice, all of this is your pathworking of what is really happening underneath, which is fairly incomprehensible, and that is a seer. And the Kabbalists say that Malkuth is in Kether, and Kether is in Malkuth, but after a different manner. And that's because we live in this world here of separation, and that's why we have the world card in the middle, because it is our model of the world as it is. So we are modeling something that exists, something that is here, now and active, but that is not what it really is. It's only our perception of it. Does that make sense? That our model of the world is how we experience it in ourself through our thoughts and feelings, and the world of action as it is totally unknowable, because it's incomprehensible, because we don't have all of the perceptual organs to actually perceive it as it actually is every second, all of the time. And as it actually is connected to Kether as well. So I know that's a bit of a concept, but it is very important in terms of our 4 worlds. Okay, so let's just stick with 4 worlds then, and now we'll go on to our practical technique, because it's very important to keep this practical rather than just concepts that we talk about. So there are 4 worlds, increasing in density and going up in sublimity all the way to the top. Now, the 4 worlds are used by Kabbalists to explain the Bible, for example. So when a Kabbalist looks at the Bible, they don't look at it just as a description, as a story. They look at it in the 4 worlds. And this is really important, because it will help you totally change the way you look at your tarot cards, I think, because the tarot is sort of our Bible. It's sort of our holy book, and therefore it's good to be able to read it in these 4 worlds, in these 4 levels. Now the first world is literal. So we literally describe what's on the card. So when we are explaining a card in the lowest world, we literally say what's on it. So here is a tarot card. It has the Latin number V111, which is 8 at the top. It has a blue background and a yellow floor. It has a man who is carving a yellow pentacle with a chisel and a small hammer. He is wearing, and so on. So we literally describe the card only in terms of its literalness. Now, a good exercise to practice that is to watch television with the sound off. As Marcy is saying, the Kabbalist would only usually interpret the first 5 books of the Bible, generally speaking. Just going back to this card then, the way to practice is to watch the television, switch the sound off, and then try and keep it literal. So if you said there is a man and 2 younger men and they are arguing and they are angry, that is an interpretation. You have to keep it literal. You would say there is a man, he is waving his hands quickly up and down in the air. The 2 younger men are facing him. They are opening their mouths very fast, and one of them is holding his hand in a fist and pointing at the other man, and you would describe it very literally, and just watch how you interpret things as you do it, and try and stop and dampen down your own natural interpretation, which is in effect your bias, your model, your yesod on the tree of life coming into play. So the literal level then, down at the bottom, is just to describe the card as it is. So here is a man, he has curly hair, he has red hose on, and he has workman's type shoes, and he has, and so on. And you basically describe the card as you see it. This is also a very good method for getting to know a deck, by the way. So not to project, not to interpret it in any way. That's the first level, and we call that the literal level. This is the literal way of reading a card. Now the next world up, now we can go slightly higher up the tree and interpret it symbolically, because everything is a symbol. Arthur Edward Waite said that it is not until the end of our life we realise that our whole life has been the interpretation of symbols, and that is because he knew that this world was symbolic, of course, as Ozzy Osbourne says in his song about Aleister Crowley. So now we can do symbolism. We can say the man is working and the pentacles symbolise his life work. Okay? The hammer symbolises his intention and his focus. The bench symbolises his family and all of the things that he relies on to do his work. The city in the background symbolises people around him. Can you see how we're now going another step up and we're talking about the symbolism? And this is where books on symbolism, dream interpretation, my favourite book is Serlo's book on symbolism. It's quite dated now, but it is a classic. So Serlo's book of symbols, and then we interpret it symbolically. Okay, and this is where most tarot readers sort of interpret the cards. They want to know what the symbols mean on the card, either to the designers or to oneself, or sometimes that symbolism can change depending on the question and the client. Okay, so literal, symbolic. The next level up, when we go to Bria, up at the top here, the third level up, is now what we call extended. So once you've got the literal, then the symbolic, you can now extend that into your own experience. And that is when you start to talk about, this reminds me of the story of Jacob Boehm, who was a shoemaker, and he had a vision, a divine vision, and decided that. And now you start talking generally, and then you say to the client, because that is like you standing on your doorstep at the moment, which is a symbolic doorstep, ready to start a new career and a new life. But like Jacob Boehm, you hesitated until you were waiting for a sign. And basically you are now extending your symbolic interpretation out into your own experience. And that is when a reader really comes into their own, and is usually where readers differ most, because that's your own experience, the stories you know, the films you've watched, the songs you've sung, and everything else. So basically you then extend the reading into other areas, and hopefully they tie into the client's experience and help them understand the symbolism and how they can then apply it to their life. Okay, makes sense? So you have literal, symbolic, and extended. And then finally, right up at the top of the card, in the fourth world, you then have your final level, which is secret. And this is when you suddenly click and you say something like we did with our sort of tricking the oracle a few days ago, and you just say something that really hits the nail. It's intuitive, you don't know where it came from because it came from high up, it came from the top. And that's when people talk about channeling or being inspired or just intuiting something. And that is the kernel of what the whole thing is about for that person in that moment. So we have the literal, we have the symbolic, we have the extended, and then we have the secret. And those are the four levels of reading a card. And when you listen to any reader from now on, you can listen and think, are they talking literal? Have they moved to symbolic? Is that extended? Oh my gosh, that was a core secret moment. And you see it in their face when they suddenly say something and it's arisen from all of the others. Now, how to use that model when you get stuck on a card. Now, what most people do, and I've observed this over 40 years, when they get stuck on a card, particularly if they're being watched, they go extended. Basically, and I'll drop that card for a second, what they do is they've gone up here, they've done the symbolism, then for some reason they forget the symbolism of the card, or they just get lost in explaining it, and they go extended, and then they go sideways out of here. And all of a sudden they're talking about cliches and general advice, sort of things like the darkest hour is always before the dawn, you know. And it reminds me of the time that I was at school and someone said to me, and they go off here. Meanwhile, the client is waiting for something that applies to them, and unfortunately, because the reader is panicking, even if they're not showing it, if they're professional, you can panic and not show it, they're going extended, they're going sideways here. And you can watch people do this all the time. Some readers jump from here, they don't know the symbolism of the cards, they go straight to here, and then they go sideways, and some of that will apply to the client and some of it won't. But that's the sort of reading that they will offer them, an extended reading from very little that's based on the literal card in front of them and the symbolism of that card, but it all relies on the reader's ability to weave a story sideways and extend it outwards. And sometimes they're very lucky because they fasten to the secret bit, and that comes through, and they really say something that has a profound meaning to the client. But here's the trick. if you get lost with a card, if you get drifted off with it, if you can't really keep track of where your symbolism is, do this one simple thing, and it is go down to the bottom, go literal. And it's the last thing, is the counterintuitive thing that most readers will do, because they want to think that they're an expert and they can go symbolic or extended or even channel secret. But actually, and I do this, and I've taught myself to do it, is I go back down, and I'm not frightened to go all the way to the bottom and start reading the card at the bottom again. I literally start to say, so if I imagine I got stuck and I was like, it's the Eight of Pentacles, and that means the symbolism, and I was talking about working in a shop, and what I do is I immediately drop to, now, let me just focus again. On this card, we see a man working on a bench, as we said. And there's a sort of tree up here, which is strange. It means he's working outside. And he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pentacles here. He's got one on the floor and one on the bench. Now, it may be that you have something that's on your bench at the moment. And now, can you see what's happening? I'm now going symbolic. By dropping to the bottom, I can now go symbolic. I'll find something in describing the card, reading the card, that is symbolic. And then I'll suddenly say, so I bet there's a pentacle that you have that you drop to the floor, isn't there? And all of a sudden the client will go, oh my gosh, that's what I've done with my other project, and blah, blah, blah. And suddenly we're in extended, and off we go again. So the trick is to be brave, to say what you see, because after all, as Marcy is sort of alluding to, we are tarot card readers, so we read the tarot card. The tarot card has everything in it that we need, and that is literal. So always drop down to the literal. Don't try and be clever, just drop straight down to the literal, and you'll suddenly find yourself being able to build upwards again, back to the symbolic, the extended, and quite often you go straight back up to the secret bit, skipping these 2 points, and really hit something hard for the client by not being frightened to go literal, and remember that you are a tarot card reader. Make sense? And that is my secret method for reading the cards, even if you're stuck, or even if you don't know the deck. It's a very good way of thinking about a deck. I also think that this, what's called in biblical studies exegesis, where you are explaining sacred text, which is what we're doing with our tarot in every reading, is very good for reviewing books and films. One of my favourite film reviewers, whose name I've just lost, Mark Kermode. He's very good at reviewing a film, and he says, I've just been to see this film. It's a long film. It's an hour and a half. It was filmed in Dolby surround sound, and it was done by the director so and so, and blah blah blah. And he says all of the literal things about it, and then he says, and so mainly the film is a film about redemption, and there's a lot of aspects in it that are on the redemptive theme, with symbolism of sacrifice and so on. And he talks about the symbolism, and then if you listen, he then starts to say it reminded me of films of the Japanese director so and so, in effect, because the cameraman on those films, you know, and then he extends it outwards and he puts it into context of film history. So he extends it, and then he'll say, but at heart it is a film about, and then he will say the core of the film, and it's beautiful to watch. So if you watch a film review by Mark Kermode, you'll now be able to see him go from literal, symbolic, extended and secret, all the way. And it's a brilliant way of reviewing things, reviewing books or reviewing films and thinking about them yourself. Because you cover all of the literal stuff, you think about the symbolism and learn more symbolism, and then you link it with all of your other films that you've ever watched and your context, and then you get to the core of it, which is the same core for everything from Malkuth to Kether. Make sense? Isn't that cool? Now there's one final trick, and then we're going to read our bedtime story for the last 10 minutes, and this is a great way of remembering what I've just been talking about. I'm going to write down at the bottom of this the Hebrew for those things. So it's Peshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. Okay, so I'll just put those there. This is explained in several of our books. Basically, this is literal. This is symbolic. It actually means in sort of hints or something like that. Drosh means extended or inquiry, sideways, and Sod means secret. It's where we get the word sodality from. So secret. So it's basically literal, extended, literal, symbolic, extended, and secret. Make sense? Those are the Hebrew words. Obviously, we put the vowels in them because that would be Pei, Shin, Tau, Peshat, and we put the E and the A in it to pronounce it. So those are the 4 words. But here's the beautiful trick with this. Take a look at the first letter, and this is what the Kabbalists refer to, the first letter of each of those words in Hebrew. We have P, R, D, and S, Peshat, Remez, Drosh, Sod, and that makes the word Pardes, P-R-D-S, P-R-D-S, and those Hebrew letters, because obviously all of this is in Hebrew originally, these Hebrew letters spell out the word for garden, and we know it already. Probably you'll recognize what it is, because it's not just garden or any old garden, it's actually that garden, paradise. So the Hebrew scholars, the Kabbalists, call this the formula of paradise, because the letters for literal, symbolic, extended, and secret spell out the word P-R-D-S, which spells out the word paradise or garden in Hebrew. And of course, by transliterating and seeing our holy books, whatever those holy books are, in these 4 levels, Peshat, Remez, Drosh, Sod, literal, extended, symbolic, secret, take us back up the tree and back to the garden, back to paradise. Isn't that cute? So this whole system sort of holds together in terms of Kabbalah, but it can be used even for an everyday film review. But more importantly, for us as card readers, we can listen to other readers and see which level they're operating on and how they move between those levels. And for us, if we get stuck, always go down to the bottom of the garden, the literal level, and then go back to symbolic. Then you'll finally get to extended, and you'll find some sort of core in it, and you won't skip a beat. I never skip a beat in a tarot reading unless there's something really overwhelming happening in my brain at the time, because I always just drop down to literal. And if I get stuck, you wouldn't probably notice it, because I'm just describing the card while I'm waiting for my brain to link it back to the symbolic again. And so it makes for a far more fluid reading and a far more confident one, because you can never get stuck, because you've got your clues right in front of you. Okay, excellent. So that is the formula of paradise. Yeah, all of this would be written in Hebrew and right to left, but I'm not going to do that for purposes of simplicity in demonstrating it. Okay then, so so what have we covered? We've covered the formula of paradise, the four worlds, and how that applies to a tarot card reading. And now I need to find our bedtime story. Just to finish off with. So again, we are going up the tree of life in our bedtime story, and sometimes when we get to a particular palace, then Crowley deals with the paths that are leading into it. Trying to work out, it helps if I look at it. So if we read a description of the 7th palace, or the 1, 2, 3, 4th palace going up, then we're also likely to read and hear in Crowley's description the paths leading below it. And I can't remember where we'd got to yesterday, but we'd got to oh yes, Lola Daydream, being taken up the tree of life by her fairy prince, had the most delicious honeymoon and even had a baby, but then she'd remembered herself just in time not to get lost with all of that, said to the fairy prince, as she does in each house going up, "Kiss me." And he kissed me and said, "My goodness, but that was a near thing that time. My little girl nearly went to sleep." Most people who reach the 7th house stay there all their lives, I can tell you. It did seem a shame to go on. There was such a flashing green star to light it, and all the air was filled with amber-coloured flames like kisses. And we could see through the floor, and there were terrible lions like furnaces for fury, and they all roared out, "Holy, holy, holy," and leaped and danced for joy. And when I saw myself in the mirrors, the dome was one mass of beautiful green mirrors. I saw how serious I looked, and that I had to go on. I hoped the fairy prince would look serious too, because it is the most dreadful business going beyond the 7th house. But he only looked the same as ever. But oh, how I kissed him, and how I clung to him, or how I think I should never have had the courage to go up those dreadful passages, especially knowing what was at the end of them. And now I'm only a little girl, and I'm ever so tired of writing, but I'll tell you about all of the rest another time. And here Crowley puts a little verse in Latin, because what we're doing now is we are moving from Netzach, the green palace, and we have to cross up into Tiferet. And we're going to do that through the paths of death and the devil. And in Kabbalah there is seen a veil that hides this upper part of the tree from this middle bit and the lower bit, and this is called the veil, and that sort of hides that bit. Because basically there is a difference of our state between our everyday state and our more mystical or spiritual state when we access our core in Tiferet. And we have to go through the veil to do it. Now tomorrow, when I read that little section, I have to warn you, and I will warn people beforehand, that Crowley makes some very macabre images for death and the devil. Of course he would, but they are symbolic, and we have to remember that when Crowley is talking about, for example, sacrificing babies, he means he is having a sexual experience without actually a woman conceiving a baby. Therefore it is a waste of a potential life, therefore it is a sacrifice of a baby. But Crowley, as we know, loved to shock people, and we have a couple of shocking images that I have to warn you about for death and the devil before we go across to Tiferet. And Crowley is also challenging us as well to try and keep things symbolic, because unless we do, we can't ascend above the symbolic. We have to go and transcend our symbolism and not get stuck in symbols in order to go beyond the veil, if that makes sense. So we'll read that bit tomorrow, and it'll get a little bit of a Grimm's fairy tale part of the story, but then we get to some more higher stuff once we get beyond the points of death and the devil. Okay, so we're at 40 minutes. That's good timing for us. Again, I hope everyone is doing okay. The world is changing from hour to hour and day to day. Yesterday, obviously, they closed all of the public venues, pubs and things like that in the UK, and I know different countries are now at different stages of locking down and responding to the pandemic. So I hope everyone is looking after themselves, following the best advice possible, and trying to stay sane in these very changing times. So bye for now, and I look forward to shocking you terribly through Aleister Crowley tomorrow, just briefly though, and then we can get on with the rest of our fairy story, and we'll perhaps look at some tarot magic tomorrow. We have plenty of time. Just a by the by, I posted the full one card reading method in the file section of the Facebook group, so you can find it there. We talked about that yesterday, a simple method of doing it. I dug out from 10 years ago the slightly more detailed version of doing it, which you can find in the file section, and give that a try. Do a deep 1 hour, one card reading with any card in any deck. Some decks are better than others because it's the number of symbols in the card that really makes a difference. Hope you found that interesting, and any questions, ask me for tomorrow and we'll pick up there. So stay safe until tomorrow, everyone. We've gone a week, we're now on day 8, so if we can do 1 week, we can do another week, I'm sure. Take care. Bye for now.